Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HHH podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about the horrible humans in history, and I am so excited to have you all here today. Welcome to those of you who are now just joining us for the first time. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and welcome back to all of you who have been listening to my last few episodes. We're excited for today. My name is Angela Pearson. I am your host, and as I've mentioned in the past, I have a master's degree in history, but I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology. So with these horrible humans that we're talking about, I kind of like to delve into the psychology of them and kind of see what's going on. So the last two episodes, we have talked about two horrible serial killers who are definitely psychopaths. And how you can tell what a psychopath is, I know we use that term quite a bit in vocabulary, but it's being callous or having a lack of emotions and not being able to connect well with other people and sympathize. Today, we're going to talk about a narcissist, and all of us have probably known a narcissist, but this guy's a genuine narcissist. He has a pattern of grandiosity, he needs admiration, and he has no empathy at all. And if you haven't listened to my last episode, you probably don't know who this is. So we're taking a switch from talking about some serial killers to talking about a dictator. Now, I know you're automatically going to think of Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, some of these really, Pol Pot, whoever, some of these more famous dictators. Today, we're talking about someone that not many people have probably ever heard of, but he's also really important to talk about. His name is Idi Amin Dada. Dada. I can't. Guys, I'm forewarning you. There's a lot of names in this episode that if I butcher, I am so sorry. I am doing my best. But his name is Idi Amin Dada, and he ruled over Uganda from 1971 to 1979. And in those 8 years, it only took 8 years for him to kill between 300,000 to 500,000 Ugandans. 8 years. He actually has a nickname because of his brutality. His nickname is the Butcher of Uganda. So today we're going to explore how he earned that nickname and how he has become known as a horrible human in history. So first, let's explore Idi's childhood and where he actually came from, because I feel like in all of these stories, the childhood and the background made a very significant impact later in life. So first and foremost, there's a lot of debate about where and when Idi Amin Dada was born. The guesses for his birth year range from 1923 to 1928, but most people believe that he was probably born more towards 1923 just because of how he aged and that kind of thing, but there was never solid proof that that's when he was born. He was also born in Koboko in the northern part of Uganda. This is a pretty solid fact, but he would actually go on to tell people that he was born in the capital of Uganda, Kampala, because later he wanted to create this image of wholesomeness and a true Ugandan by being born in the capital. But it's pretty well understood that he was actually born in Koboko. So he was born, it was a very small village in Koboko. There wasn't a lot of people and not a lot of opportunities. So he was born to his father and mother. His father was part of a small ethnic group called the Kakwa, and his mother was part of another small ethnic group called like I said, I'm going to butcher these names, guys. The Lugbara, yeah, ethnic group. So he was born to very minority ethnic groups in Uganda. And this is important. And I know I always say this, like, keep this in mind because later in the episode it'll have an impact, but it's true. Every time I say it, it's true. You need to know that his parents were part of these small nationalities because they will play a role later on in his brutality for sure. So when he was small, his father actually abandoned him and left him and his mother alone in this small village to fend for themselves. He did occasionally see his father later in life, but he wasn't heavily involved in Idi's life. His mother was a traditional herbalist, and that's what she used or did to provide for Idi and herself in this poor small village. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity. And at this point in time, Uganda was actually under the rule of the British Empire. So they were occupied by Britain. And so a lot of the people there were oppressed and didn't have as many opportunities because of this. But she worked really hard to provide for her and her son in this small town and tried to get him to go to school. So his father had actually converted to become a Muslim after converting from Roman Catholicism. And so when Idi was old enough, his mother had him attend a Muslim school until about the 4th grade when he dropped out of school. So Idi has only received a 4th grade education, and it was from a Muslim school. So instead of pursuing education and trying to fit into the small opportunities within his small village, Idi decided that he was going to join the King's African Rifles as an assistant cook. So like I said, Uganda is under British rule at this point. So the British Army was pretty prevalent there, and they gave people opportunities to have jobs. So he became an assistant cook, and I will point out that at this time it was very rare for any Ugandan-borns to receive any kind of promotion within the military. So during his being an assistant cook in the King's African Rifles, he did receive military training, and he started to stand out in all of his training. Now, Idi has made claims, or did make claims, that he actually served in Burma and Myanmar during World War II, but that is totally false because his service started in 1946 when the war ended in 1945. So there was literally no way he could have fought in World War II because the war was over well before he ever joined the military. But he received a lot of military training and eventually would actually transfer to Kenya to serve in the 21st Car Infantry Battalion. So that's capital K, capital A, capital R, in case you're curious. So there, he actually helped put down rebellions against the Somalian rebels and then the Mau Maus in Kenya. This is where he starts to gain a reputation for being kind of brutal. In 1953, they actually promoted him to being a sergeant. Like I said, one of the only Ugandan soldiers to be elevated to an officer position. That was very rare in the British Army. So the reason why he started gaining a reputation for being brutal at this point in time was because at some point he was actually sent out to deal with an issue where pigs were being stolen from a village. And when he went to put down this issue, he actually ended up killing multiple people, like finding the people that were stealing the pigs and just brutalize them. And instead of being arrested and instead of being investigated, also this is this is a trend you'll notice. Instead of being investigated, he gets promoted and he gets sent off to get more training from the British military. So that happens quite a few times where there's instances of him being brutal, and instead of being in trouble, he gets promoted. So that's kind of how his military career went, is he would do horrible things and he would get promoted. So also at this time, he was gaining a reputation of being quite the athlete. Like, he was becoming famous for his athleticism because he actually became the lightweight heavy boxing champion of Uganda. And it makes sense why. He was 6'4", so he was pretty intimidating. He was a very large man, and he participated in many other sports, but became the heavyweight boxing champion. So he knew how to fight. He knew how to be pretty brutal, and it came across in all of his athleticism as well. So in 1962, Uganda actually gained their independence from Britain. So this launched Idi's career because he was able to get really close to the new prime minister, Milton Obote. Now, I will say, I would call them, they would maybe have like a bromance or they're BFFs. They become really tight. And in 1964, he had impressed Obote so much that he made Idi the commander of the entire army. So he had been promoted so much that now he was basically the second most powerful man in the country. So I do need to make a clarification, because when I was doing my research, I got very confused, mostly because of all the different names and everything. But in addition to the prime minister, Uganda also had a president. So they had a prime minister named Obote and a president named Kabaka. That's important that you know that at least there's a prime minister and a president. That's important for what happens next, because Obote and Idi were so close. Like I said, bromance. They really liked each other. They went into smuggling together. They started smuggling gold and ivory, and they cashed it outside of Uganda so they could become really wealthy. Now, the president, this is where that becomes important, Kabaka, actually suspected them of doing this and decided that they needed to be investigated. So he ordered an investigation. Well, Obote did not like this. He liked that he was able to smuggle out a lot of money for himself and Idi. So what did he do? Obote decided to draft a new constitution that got rid of the president's position. So the president no longer had any power, and Obote could do whatever he wanted. So after he wrote this new constitution, he ordered Idi to attack the presidential palace, forcing President Kabaka to flee the country. So they basically took over all power. So now, Idi was for sure the second most powerful man in the country of Uganda, right behind Obote. And I will tell you something about Idi. He didn't like being second place. I will tell you that right now. Talked about he's a narcissist. He thinks he deserves everything. He doesn't like being second in command, but he'll take it for now. So, in the last part of the 1960s, the BFF relationship between Obote and Idi started to show some cracks. They were both having a little bit of political discourse with each other. They didn't agree on every way to run the country, and Obote was starting to get suspicious of his commander. So, in 1970, Idi was actually promoted to the commander of all armed forces in the nation. But by the end of 1970, Obote regretted that decision quite heavily. So he actually tried to rescind the position and say, you know what, forget it. I actually don't want you to have this. Yeah, that didn't go well. That didn't go well at all, because in early 1971, Idi was confident that Obote was going to have him arrested. So instead, he staged a coup while Obote was in Singapore. So he took over the government from Obote because he knew he was going to get arrested for betraying Obote. So when he took over the government, he promised the people, you know, I will have fair elections. I promise. Once things calm down, once we figure all of this out, we're going to have free elections and you guys are going to be able to pick your leader. Do you guys believe that? Because I don't believe that. And they shouldn't have believed that, because it was a total lie. Idi wanted the power all to himself. So he became the ruler. He took all the power in Uganda on January 25th, 1971. So when I said early in 1971, I meant early in 1971. So, guys, are you ready for the title he gave himself? So when I say he's a narcissist, not exaggerating, because this is the title that Idi Amin Dada gave himself. It is His Excellency President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general, and Uganda in particular. And he also would call himself the last king of Scotland. How ridiculous. Like, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea. I hope he was being sarcastic, but when you hear more about him, I don't think he was. So that was his official title that he gave himself. And Idi, you have to know about Idi Amin. He was a very two-faced leader. On one hand, in front of cameras and around the people, he would dance, he would sing. He even had interviews while he was swimming in his pool in his pajamas. Like, he was super acting chill and cool and, like, no cares in the world, super kind, cared about his people. But then, behind the scenes, he was brutal and ruthless and a killer. He was terrifying because he was so two-faced that you never knew what you were going to get. At one moment, he could be totally calm and happy and cheerful, and within a second, bam, he'd be crazy and ferocious. So he was not someone a lot of people trusted, and a lot of people were terrified of him. So when Idi took power, he actually cleansed the military of any Obote supporters. And when I say cleansed, I don't want you to think that he relieved people of their position or he let people go. I want you to think he went into barracks, found people who supported Obote, and killed them. They were called the Barrack Massacres, where he killed 5,000 to 6,000 men. And these happened they happened in the year 1972, 1973, and 1977. Because another thing about Idi is he was paranoid. He was so paranoid that someone would rise up against him or someone would betray him. And he did not want to risk that. So he went through and found any of the previous leaders' supporters and killed them. Flat out killed them. And you know what's crazy? Is despite doing this, despite going through and killing so many men in his military, he was actually able to grow his military from 10,000 troops to 25,000 troops. Like, how do you do that while you're killing 5,000 to 6,000 of your men? Like, I'm curious what his advertisements were for that, because maybe no one knew about the deaths of all the military men. I don't know. But he was able to grow his military. So after he purged his military, he turned on his own people. It was time to purge the people. First, he actually targeted religious leaders, educational leaders, and anyone in any opposing government bodies. So professors, he would drag out and kill. Any religious leaders, he would kill. And then he eventually turned his targets to the citizens of Uganda. He gave his military free rein to basically take anyone that they had any kind of suspicion towards and kill them. So military people could just be driving down the street, and if they didn't like the way you looked, they could pick you up and you would be gone forever. So his military had the freedom to just assume whatever they wanted about people and kill them. So there's also a building. It was a pink L-shaped building on the Nakasero Hill in Kampala. So in the capital, up on this hill, there was a pink L-shaped building. It was called the State Research Bureau, or the SRB. It sounds pretty educational, right? Where people would do research studies or help the government know what direction they should go with these studies. No, that is not what this is. The State Research Bureau, or the SRB, was actually the headquarters of Idi's secret police. And this is where they kept prisoners that would be brutally tortured and killed. So any of those religious leaders or government leaders or education leaders or even just random people would be brought to this building where they would be tortured and killed. Now, I found this really interesting. So the secret police all wore the same kind of outfit. And I know what you're thinking, like black suits, sunglasses, something super sketchy, right? Wrong. Let me paint this picture for you. His secret police, it's not funny because these people were horrible, horrible people, but I just have a really funny image in my head. They wore bell bottoms, like big bell bottoms, and flowered shirts, like the brightly colored picture 70s flowered shirts, sometimes with jackets and sunglasses. That is what they all wore. So everyone knew who the quote unquote secret police were because they all dressed the same way. Picture circa 70s, bell bottoms, flowered shirts, sunglasses. That was the secret police in Uganda. And part of me that actually strikes more fear because that's so casual and so like non-threatening that it's almost more threatening because it shouldn't be intimidating, right? Anyways, moving on from the outfits. So crazed agents of Idi's actually ran this State Research Bureau, and they would torture the people that were brought there by strangulation. They would shoot them, they would electrocute them, and even behead them. And they were all quote unquote enemies of the state. There was no proof to say that they were actually enemies of the state. They just claimed they were enemies of the state. And at least 20 or more people would die there every single day. Every single day. So here is a story. There's actually a survivor named Reverend George Lukawea who described his experience in this SRB institution. He said, and, I try and keep these not super graphic, but I can't help it with this story. So just a warning on this one. But he said, one day the secret police picked me up saying that I had made an attempt to assassinate President Amin. So Idi. It was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous charge, but there was no convincing these people. So they brought me to the SRB. It didn't take them long to strip me and start beating me. Many attackers were high on drugs and alcohol. Every time they tortured me, I thought I would all soon be over. They kept demanding a confession, but I had nothing to confess, so they just continued to beat me with the butts of their rifles. For 3 months, I lived in constant fear, and quite often I'd pray, God, please let me die quickly. At one time, I found myself in a 10-foot by 16-foot room with 60 other prisoners. Every day, one of those men would either die or be murdered. Usually, the guards would just leave the dead bodies there in the cell. Often, we had corpses all around us for more than a week. The smell was horrible. We'd try piling them up in a corner and covering them. Sometimes we'd all go for 2 weeks without water. Prisoners became so thirsty, they drank each other's urine. We considered ourselves lucky if we got food twice a week. That's a survivor's story of how horrible it was in that building, in that SRB. I can't even imagine dealing with that. And that's just one person's story. So not all of Idi's victims actually were sent to this prison. In fact, most of them were not. Majority of his victims never saw this building. Many were just pulled from their homes or off the street to be shot or set on fire or fed to the crocodiles. And in some instances, they just disappeared and their family never ever saw them again, not knowing what happened to them. And like I said, the military had free reign to decide who they would pick up and who they wouldn't. So Christians were at the top of his targeted list, as well as anyone belonging to the Lambi and Acholi tribes. I think I'm saying that, Acholi tribes. So, like I said at the very beginning of this episode, his ethnic group played an important role in who he decided he wanted to target in his killings, because his tribes were smaller than those two tribes, and apparently they had beefs with each other. So that is why he targeted the Lambi and the Acholi tribes, because he did not like them. And since he was Muslim, he had targeted the Christians, even though majority of the country was Christian. That is who he targeted. Now, to illustrate his brutality, there are rumors that Idi actually kept severed heads in his fridge. I watched a couple of documentaries, and a few of them actually stated that he would do this. He used it as an intimidation tactic. So when he had people over and he'd require them to go get something from the fridge, and there would be severed heads in there. He also had made claims that he himself had eaten human meat and was proud of the fact that he had been a cannibal. He literally said that human flesh was saltier than leopard meat. And he was totally fine talking about this. He totally accepted that he had done that and saw no problem with it. He also had a reputation for, this is really, really graphic, so I am so sorry, but he would cut off the genitals of a man and shove it down the man's throat before killing him, as a way to embarrass and humiliate the person before he was killed. So he was not a nice person. If you haven't gathered that from all of what I've already talked about, he is horrible. He is a horrible dictator that people don't talk enough about. Anyways, it is believed that in the first year, just the first year of his reign of terror, that 100,000 people were killed. A lot of them were probably in his military, but it was also those political rivals and religious leaders and those kinds of people that he murdered. But by the end of his rule, like I mentioned, they estimate up to 500,000 people were killed. And that is how he earned the nickname of Butcher of Uganda. So, he is just so bad. He also, because he was Muslim, he had multiple wives. And I'm going to tell you about this because no one was safe from the wrath of Idi Amin. Nobody. So he had multiple wives, about 6 of them, and many, many concubines and side chicks. He was a player. But he had 6 wives, and one night, 3 of them went out on the town with their bodyguards, and they ended up staying out a little too late, and Idi Amin found out about it. He was not happy because it was not appropriate for the wife of the leader or a Muslim woman to be out on the town late at night with other men. It was just unacceptable. So, 2 of the wives fled the country. They ran away. The other wife stayed, and within a few weeks, her body was discovered cut up in the trunk of a car. Now, everyone knew that Idi Amin had ordered this to happen. Well, what he did after the fact was horrendous. He ordered a doctor, and I saw the interview of this doctor, and he was horrified. He said it was horrible and awful. He ordered that her body be stitched back together and put back together and put on display. And he brought his children to see it and left her body out for his countrymen to come and see it, to see what happened to an unfaithful woman when she did such horrible things to her husband. That is how brutal this man was. He was horrible. Now, on top of all of this, so he's murdered lots of people, killed hundreds of thousands. On top of that, so dictators always have to find a scapegoat, right? There's always someone to target that is causing all the issues within the country, and they need to be eliminated. So he actually picked a target to channel all of his anger and all of his countrymen's anger towards. And that was the Asians living in Uganda. So there was actually quite a large population of Indian people living in Uganda at the time, because when the British had taken over Uganda, they brought a lot of people from India to come build railroads and roads and those kinds of things. So now Britain, all of these people were now freed from Britain's control. And so there were about 80,000 Asians, Indian Asians, living in Uganda. And Idi Amin decided that they were the problem. They were why the country wasn't successful as it should be. They were taking opportunities away from the native Ugandans. It was all their fault that the Ugandans were starving and having a hard time. So there were more and more hate crimes directed at the Indian Asians, to the point where eventually Idi Amin gave all the Asians 90 days to get out of the country. So there was a mass exodus because everyone knew what would happen if you stayed. He would kill you, obviously. So there's a mass exodus of Asians fleeing Uganda because they were terrified, and all of them had to leave their homes behind. Now, most of these people had been living there since they were born, because it was their great-grandparents that had been brought in there by the British. So this was the only life that these people knew, but they were being kicked out, and they were being told that they didn't belong there anymore. Now, the ironic thing about this that I don't think Idi Amin really thought through, no, I know he didn't think through, was that this population, this part of the population of Uganda, was paying 90% of the taxes in the country. 90%. So, when he made all the Indian Asians flee, he gave all the businesses to native Ugandans and said, this is now yours. You can make all the money that they were making before. But what happened was all of those businesses collapsed because the people he gave them to didn't know how to run the businesses. And so their 90% of their income for taxes vanished. And the economy collapsed and got destroyed so badly that even today, in the year 2024, even today, they are still feeling the effects in their economy of this because they had no money. They were broke. So when Idi Amin kicked out all the Asians, at the same time, he broke all diplomatic ties with Britain and Israel and even the United States and became allies with the Soviet Union and Saudi Arabia, which we were not friendly with at the time, obviously. This was during the Cold War era. We were not friends with them at all. So they started paying him money and providing him with military support. And in 1977, he appointed a general called General Mustafa Adrisi as his vice president. And at this point, Idi Amin was becoming very paranoid, and worried that someone was going to try and assassinate him and take over his power. So when he appointed General Mustafa Adrisi, he started thinking that Adrisi was going to overthrow him, to the point where he couldn't sleep at night. He would stay up, even though he had guards placed around his entire home. He would stay up on the balcony looking into the bushes, waiting for someone to come out and attack him. He was so paranoid, no sleep. He didn't trust anybody, and even executed his own cousin because his cousin dared to say that he didn't agree with something and told him that he was stepping out of line and should calm down and stop killing so many people. He killed his cousin because his cousin said that. He became more and more suspicious of everyone. Now, Mustafa Adrisi was in a very suspicious automobile accident in 1978 that almost killed him. So he had a lot of loyal soldiers in the military. So after this happened, these soldiers mutinied against Idi Amin. They couldn't take it anymore. So Idi sent his military force to squash this insurrection. But all of these men fled into Tanzania next door. And this is where it becomes really ironic. Idi's forces followed the troops into Tanzania, accidentally invading Tanzania with his military forces. He would later claim that it was on purpose, that he was just trying to reclaim some of the land that belonged to them, but it was a total accident because they were just going to squash the insurrectionists, but fled into Tanzania and followed them. So he accidentally invades Tanzania. Well, Tanzania did not like this, obviously. So they declared war on Uganda. So obviously Tanzania replied with military force. And the rebels were fighting alongside the Tanzanian army. So they all started fighting against the Uganda forces. Well, it turns out the Ugandan forces, who thought they were so amazing and so strong and so great, weren't. The only reason why they thought they were so strong and could take on the Tanzanian army was because they had been fighting against their own populace. They'd been fighting against unarmed men. They thought they were invincible. But the Tanzanian army was much stronger, much better trained, and just kind of bulldozed the Ugandan military. And they also had the help of the rebels that had had enough of Idi's reign and torture. So when Idi saw that he was losing this battle, what did he do? He sent a message to President Julius Nyerere, the president of Tanzania, and said, "You know what? Let's solve this. We can do this. Man to man. Let's do a boxing match, and whoever wins this boxing match, we'll say they're the ones who won this war. Let's do that." Because, Idi saw that he was losing, but he knew he could win a boxing match. Julius Nyerere's response was silence. He just flat out ignored that suggestion because he knew he was going to win. So on April 11th in 1979, the capital of Kampala was actually captured, and Idi soon realized that they would be coming for him next. So what did he do? He fled the country to Saudi Arabia. The coward fled. So his regime fell in 1979. Now, he actually stayed in Saudi Arabia until 1989, when, without permission, he went to Zaire, which is currently the Dominican Republic of Congo. He just decided to go there on his own. He was immediately arrested upon arrival because he was not allowed to be there, and begged Saudi Arabia to let him come back. It was a mistake, and Saudi Arabia agreed to take him back. So that is where he actually ended up spending the rest of his life, was in Saudi Arabia. He became a fruitarian and especially loved oranges, so he actually earned the nickname of Dr. Jaffa. And he lived in Saudi Arabia until 2003, when he died of kidney failure. Now, if you're thinking, that's not fair, how did he never get prosecuted? I have the same questions. Because he never was held accountable in this lifetime for all the atrocities that he committed. Now, I will say, me personally, I think he was held accountable once he died, if you know what I mean. But he was never taken to court. He was never accused of anything horrible. Everyone knew he had done horrible things, but he was never prosecuted and never held accountable for what he did. In fact, he lived a good life up until he died of kidney failure. He was able to eat oranges and fruit for the rest of his life. So the world is not fair. I will just tell you that. The world is not fair. So he left behind a trail of bloodshed and heartbreak. So many families had lost multiple or just a single family member that they either knew were tortured, found their bodies themselves, or the family member just disappeared. And today, it is confusing because there are still people out there that praise him and think he was an amazing leader and think he was phenomenal. But all those families that were left heartbroken, wondering what happened to their family member, I am sure hate that man because he was horrible. He was an arrogant man who was like a Jekyll and Hyde. Like 1 minute, super awesome, super friendly, jump roping with girls in the village, or, swimming in his pool in his pajamas. Like, you can look that video up on YouTube. It is pretty ridiculous. He dives in the pool in his pajamas. Anyways, to suddenly just being ruthless and killing his cousin because he disagreed with him, or killing his wife because she accidentally stayed out a little too late. Like, he was brutal and horrible. He was self-centered, and he really didn't care about the people of his country because he destroyed the economy. They're still feeling the effects of his actions today. He just turned out to be a ruthless dictator, and people were hoping that, with the freedom that they were allotted once they got released from Britain's hold, that they would be able to have a thriving country. He wrecked everything and just wanted power, glory, and money. A lot of those innocent Ugandans will never know what happened to their family members, and it breaks my heart to think about that and think about how one person had so much control over people's lives. And that is why today Idi Amin is our horrible human for the week. He was atrocious. And I didn't go into a lot of details about the way he killed people and those kinds of things, because it's pretty graphic and it's not great. But he is horrible. He is the worst. And the one thing that I always think when I hear stories like this is, how could that have possibly happened? Like, those secret police, how could you be one of those people? Being okay just going and snatching people out of their homes, out of their lives, and killing them. How is that even possible? Like, everyone thinks about that with Nazi Germany or any kind of dictatorship. How could we fall prey to that? But I'm here to tell you that anyone can fall in that trap, because these dictators are really good at manipulating people and making people see what they want them to see. Just like Idi Amin made everyone think he was a man of the people, native Ugandan, really cared about his people and was fun and happy and this just go-lucky guy. Dictators are so good at putting on personas, so you would want to follow them because they're charismatic. But behind the scenes, they're just ruthless and brutal, and find people that are similar to them to follow. There was a study, you can look it up, I can't remember the name of it, where, is it Harvard or Stanford? I can't remember which school. Sorry, I didn't look this up before. I just remembered it, where they did prisoners and prison guards, and there were no rules. And as the week went on, the prisoners started becoming treated more and more brutally by the prison guards. And these were just random students who signed up for this study and said, sure, that would be fun. They didn't have any actual power. They weren't actually prisoners. They could have left any time. But human nature took over, and the little touch of power that those people had corrupted them very quickly. So that's why whenever I see these situations, I'm just like, we need to remember that people are not infallible. We can fall prey to these kinds of things as well, and to always stand up for what you believe is right and good. So Idi Amin Dada is a dictator, a horrible, horrible, brutal dictator that nobody ever talks about. And that's why I wanted to talk about him today, because most of the time it is those really famous brutal leaders like Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini and Pol Pot that get the attention because of the atrocities they committed and the millions of people that they have murdered. But there are other really horrible dictators out there like Idi Amin Dada, who destroyed the lives of so many people. And this didn't happen very long ago. And I know to the really young viewers, the 1970s seems really far away. I'm an old lady. Okay, I'm not that old. I'm a good, perfect age, okay? But for those of you who lived during that time or were born soon after that time, that doesn't seem very long ago. And we'll probably talk about some other dictators that have happened even more recently than that, and some atrocities that have happened more recently than that. But this is history, and it is something that has happened more recently. And it's just crazy to think about that. But anyways, thanks for tuning in today, guys. I hope you learned a little bit about Idi Amin Dada down in Uganda and how horrible of a human he actually is, and how we just need to talk more about these kinds of things. And we will on this channel. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you come back, because next time we are going to talk about someone who single-handedly destroyed a dynasty, destroyed a country, and you'll actually know his name, mostly because he was featured in a movie that I love from my childhood. You might know it as Anastasia. We are going to talk about Grigory hold on, it's a Russian name. Yufimovich, that's his middle name. Rasputin. And that is what we know him by, as Rasputin. And I know he's not a murderer. I know he's not a serial killer or a dictator. But this man, in my graduate program, I studied this man quite a bit, and he is a horrible human. So I'm excited to talk about him and how he helped bring about the collapse of the Romanov dynasty and actually made the civil war happen in Russia because of who he is. So even though he's not a murderer, we'll discover why he is deemed a horrible human in history. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you next week.